seek early and seek often advice. And that can be through mentorship, individual coaches, or joining an organization like Vistage. It will just add so much incredible value. And it's one of the things that I wish I had known about in my career.
Welcome back to the Mark Faris Experience. I'm your host, Mark Faris. Today, we are speaking with Rick Schwartz. We'll just say that he's a serial entrepreneur and one of the sharpest guys that I've met. His track record of winning is, I would say, it's very rare to run up against somebody that has won so many times in a row. And we're going to get into his story. Rick is the chair of Tiger 21 Naples. So this is a very exclusive group that we'll be talking a little bit about. And we'll be talking a little bit as well about another group that he's a chair on, which is Vistage. And so these help small to medium-sized businesses make better business decisions and get better results for them. So Rick, really great to have you here. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, we had a coffee and that coffee ended up going, it was a couple of hours and we both had our wives texting us like, where are you? Come home for dinner. We're like, we're talking business, just 15 more minutes, right? And, maybe you could take us back to, when you started getting into business. And I know that there's a number of different businesses you were in across multiple different industries, but maybe let's go back to the origin story and then we can work our way through the businesses that you ran, through your career.
Sure. Well, I started out my career actually when I was in college, the Vietnam War was on at the time, and the draft board was still in effect. And obviously, as a college student, I was not a revolutionary, but I was certainly concerned about the war and not wanting to serve in the war at that time. And I found on campus a program called the Cooperative Education Program, where you actually work in business for 6 months out of the year, and you go to school for 6 months out of the year. Thus, the draft board gave you 5 years to graduate instead of 4. And so I got on that program coming out of my freshman year in hopes that the war would be over by the time I graduated. And in my senior year, actually, the volunteer army came in, and I drew a relatively high number, so I wasn't called in any regard. But however, that experience of working in industry while in college proved its great value going forward, because I didn't graduate with a degree not knowing what I was going to do. I knew exactly what I was going to do when I graduated. So, and I stayed in the business of technology. Now, back in the late 60s, early 70s, computer science was not even a curriculum in any campus anywhere in the United States. They had little spotty programs here and there in the engineering school and the business school, and I took them all. But the company that I worked for in college was the Central Intelligence Agency, and they put me through every IBM class I ever wanted. And so I gained my knowledge that way. And coming out of college, then I went back to work for them for a couple of years. But as a type A, I was too driven for the government. They weren't keeping pace with me, so I left and joined a relatively young startup consulting firm, which was doing amazing things with not only re-engineering processes, but enabling them with technology. And of course, I was on the enabling side, the technology side.
Rick, when
So,
you're working for the government, how long did it take you to realize like, oh my goodness, we're just totally not aligned on how we operate on a day to day? How long were you there for?
well, in college, I wasn't thinking about that.
Right,
But when I started with them after college, within 6 months, I
right.
realized that it wasn't gonna be my career.
Yeah. It
Even
must have
though
been a
I
tough transition there to be in like a government job. I'm sure it's like a cushy job and say, you
yeah,
know what, like I got to get out and do something else.
yeah. Yeah, I'm a type A type personality,
Yeah.
and I got lots of goals, and it just wasn't challenging enough for
Hmm.
me. I decided to move on, and I found this really young, um, consulting firm that was doing great things. And it was like the type of thing where you didn't mind working 70 hours a week, which is what consulting firms back in those days used to do, because it's also exciting, good stuff. Now, in that period of time, and I spent 7, almost 8 years there, you learn many, many different industries because you're moving from company to company, project to project. and you're picking up all the different knowledge associated with all these different businesses in various different industries. And for me, being a constant knowledge person, wanting to learn everything I could, I always drove towards understanding the economic business drivers of every single contract or company I worked for, because knowing that would help me do a better job to reach their goals. And so, after completing that period of time, I moved on to another consulting firm. And when I was in that consulting firm, two of my former clients and my former boss at the consulting firm approached me about buying into a small manufacturing firm, and that's where I got my first taste of entrepreneurship. And they stayed in their respective roles in their companies, and I ran the company.
So, Rick, just before you move on, what was it that so you're working 70 hours a week, but what was it out of all their employees that they had at the time say, Rick, we want you to come in and buy into the business? What do you think separated you to be able to take that, be able to take that next step?
Two things. One was very strong personal relationships, and secondly, the manufacturing firm was very aligned with the type of work I had been doing as a consultant. I was in the logistics manufacturing space, if you will. So I understood, the business, if you will. Not that particular business that we purchased, but the manufacturing, warehousing, logistics business. So that's what was probably the key element, that with the strong relationships.
And the relationships, how did you go about, like, what was your approach to build those relationships? Like, were you intentional with who you built with, and then how'd you do it?
Well, these two gentlemen and I were the principals of a 3-year contract, that, we had. The one gentleman was on the client side, and then myself and my boss were on the consulting side, and we worked shoulder to shoulder for 3 years, building out and solving his business problem. So we spent an inordinate amount of time together, the 3 of us, working through complex business issues, technology issues, personnel issues, organizational issues. And so we had a really strong understanding of each other's talents and strengths. And so that's what drove the partnership, if you
Got
will.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that. That's
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So anyway, running that small company was a bit of a challenge. We bought it out of bankruptcy, basically, and come to find out once I got in there that the original owners were just really terrible at maintaining large capital equipment. We were again in the steel fabrication business, and so you got very heavy machinery, and some of our clients were very, very strict in the tolerances that we had to deliver. And so, they had abused that capital equipment over the years, and I no longer could gain that tolerance that was required, like 1/64th of an inch, was required for some of these tolerances. And so, unfortunately, we had to pour labor into it, and that's where all of our gross margin went. And so we could never seem to make any money. We sold everything we made, but making money was difficult. And so about year 2, 2.5, I went back to my partners and said, "Look, either we're gonna have to recapitalize the company and buy heavy equipment because I can't even the manufacturer reps can't get this thing squared away, or I have another idea. Let's outsource all of our production." And there's a lot of other companies like ours in the valley here. We were in Seattle, in the, South Seattle in the valley, and I struck up some relationships with these companies. I would like to talk to them about taking on our production, and we'll just keep manufacturing, no, excuse me, marketing and sales, and they'll do the back end for us. This is 1983 timeframe, so quite revolutionary back in those days. Outsourcing wasn't really a talked about word, and in other words, I didn't even describe it as outsourcing. I just said, "Let's get somebody else to make the stuff." So so we decided to do that as opposed to recapitalizing the company. And that was very successful, and when we did that, I basically then sold out my ownership and moved back into a consulting role, and I went back into the industry, as a consultant for about another 5 years when I decided that, "You know what? I can do this better on my own than working for somebody else," and that's when I started my own, consulting firm, and we kept it pretty much as, I'll call it a lifestyle company as opposed to trying to build a company to actually liquidate at some future point in time. But what was interesting about it, I had 2 junior partners. What was really interesting about it is I took a page from my college days and I said, "Look, instead of hiring a lot of staff, let's hire, strong MBA students that are just thirsty for the real world to basically augment what they're learning in the classroom." And at the time, I was living in the Boston area, and with Harvard and MIT right in my backyard, it was no problem finding the best of the best to actually do our projects. Now, we were at this time doing a lot of what I'll call strategy for very, very large corporations, Fortune 50 companies, big, big banks. And I had a talent for business development. And so I could get access to these companies and basically provide proposals that had complex solutions associated with them that solved their business problems. And then the MBA students from Harvard and MIT would come in and actually work the projects and just did an amazing, amazing job. And so I
So
ran that.
Rick, I just want to pause there. So
Yeah,
going back to the manufacturing and then starting your own business and doing it on your own, there's a theme, and definitely it was in my previous conversation with
right.
you, is that it's not a, you shared the one example about how you think through decisions. And so, you coming up with, and I just thought this was the main takeaway that I took from the conversation. I just thought it was genius. You had a mentor
Yeah.
teach you something. Can you share
Oh
what
yeah,
that is?
yeah. So very, very young in my career. I mean, I was probably 3 years out of college. Um, I'm very analytical, and sometimes I see things black and white, 0, 1, and, my boss at the time and I were reading, a request for proposal, and as we're reading through it, basically standing shoulder to shoulder over the desk, looking down at the document and reading it, I came across this one paragraph, and I kinda read it somewhat out loud, and I said, "See there? It's this." And he stopped me and said, "No, no, no, wait a minute." He said, "That is just different. It's not right or wrong, black or white, it's just simply different." That changed my mental outlook on life from that day forward. Now I began to understand that what I call there's gray space. There is always room in there somewhere between left or right that you can negotiate and navigate. And so with that, I think it really advanced my career immensely. My mental outlook, my thinking process was just changed forever. And as I mentioned to you when we met, it's something that I'll never forget that day. Never ever forget that day because it was like starstruck. It was that powerful.
Well, and just to kind of reiterate what Rick is saying here is that as business owners, and no matter what you do, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're an entrepreneur, whatever that is, the reality is there's not a right and a wrong. There's not two answers. But what Rick is saying is that there's multiple answers. And what you think is right, or you think that there's only two options, as soon as you step back and say, okay, these are just two different answers, but where's the third and the fourth and the fifth? And probably, Rick, you're probably thinking 10, 20, different options down the road. The one example you gave to really point this, drive this home, is the example you had when you ran out of office space. Can you
Right.
share that example?
Sure. So in that manufacturing firm, we were growing and we ran out of manufacturing space, and our offices were like carved out of a corner of the complex. And so I went to look for another way to basically take that space back and move it back into manufacturing. So I decided to put a business trailer in the parking lot.
I thought this was genius because, as business owners, like, oh, we're outgrowing this. We need another building. But again, you thought differently and you thought outside the box.
Right.
And that's where you ended up renting you used the parking space
Right.
and put a trailer, put a trailer out
Yeah.
there. I just thought that was just smart.
Yeah, I mean, when you find and you're a builder, when you find builders building, they put their construction trailers on the
Right.
lot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I said, "Well, let's just put the trailer on the lot." I mean, and we don't have to be in the building, you know? And I didn't wanna go and move the operation because we needed more space, so that was the idea that I came up with.
Well, and that's where you ended up with the solution about outsourcing the actual manufacturing as well, which I just thought was really genius. And it reminds me of I'm not sure which wine company it is. It might be it's one of the larger box wineries, I believe, that they were producing wine and they realized that the wine that was phenomenal was not, maybe not the box this case, but the winery was producing great wine, and they realized that the wine wasn't being sold because they didn't have the relationships in the distribution. And so what they ended up doing was they did exactly what you did. They went to direct to the vineyards and they ended up buying the wine from them, but they realized what business they were truly in. They were in the distribution business, not in the wine business. And even though they sell the most wine out there, they realize they're in the distribution. So if you're listening to this, it's really important to really figure out what business are you truly in. And Rick, maybe you can maybe give some insight into that as well. As like, you thought, you're in the manufacturing, and you are, but you realize that you're really in, there's marketing that was involved to be able to get the contracts, but then you can outsource the actual manufacturing part of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because our customers were, we had good, strong customers. We had repeat customers, and we found that we could sell everything we made. It's just that we couldn't make it profitably. So the question was, how do we make it profitably? Well, we could continue doing what we're doing and never succeed, or we could, like I decided, outsource it, give it to someone who actually could do it. Now, that's easier said than done, because the other manufacturers in the valley, and we were basically, I'd call ourselves steel fabricators. And there's some very large industrial companies in the Seattle area, such as Boeing, which was a customer, Kenworth, Packard trucks. They were big customers of ours. So we had talent in the sales side, marketing side, but we didn't have the manufacturing capabilities that I think we needed to have the quality product we needed and to be able to make money. And so that's why we moved away from what we didn't do well and stayed with what we did very well. So, and that combination worked for us.
That's so smart. So yeah, you look at your people skills, but you also look at your like in this case here, you didn't have the right machines, right? You didn't have the right equipment to be able to deliver on that. So if you're not sure what it is, really look at where you're making money and where do you shine above, and do like what Steve Jobs did. He came in and he basically shut down majority of all the different projects, and you just focus on the few that brought the most amount of profit in. And so the example that Rick shared is really great, and you might be able to resonate with that, and then be able to make a big decision that could change the trajectory of your business. Like, Rick, what happened once you transitioned over and you outsourced that with that business?
Right. So it took us about 6 months to actually make the full transition over. And once we did that, I decided that, my learning was now going to level off significantly. And so I talked to my partners, and I basically sold my shares back to them, and they continued on with the company. So that's when I took my exit, and I moved off and went back into the consulting world. But here's another lesson to pick up on this, is you have to understand your key performance indicators. If you understand what they are, then you can make those kinds of decisions with a lot of what I'll call understanding and confidence. If you're not on top of your key performance indicators, you're not tracking them and monitoring them, then the business can get away from you, and you may not make a good decision in the end. So it's always, like I said, when I started, even when I was working as a college kid, I wanted to understand the economic drivers of whatever I was doing for whomever I was doing it. And so once was running my own company, obviously that was one of my guiding principles, is understand my economic business drivers. And so that's how I was able to confidently make those decisions when I felt the time was right.
I love that. And what would you say, being across multiple different industries, what do you think the top KPIs that a business in general should be tracking? Because there's a lot of different business owners across different industries that's listening to this, but what would you say would be some consistent ones that definitely most businesses should be tracking?
From an operational perspective, it's labor and materials. And then you want your sales metrics, and then you want your financial metrics. So there's three major buckets. Now, I'm not talking about dozens and dozens of KPIs. I'm talking about, less than maybe 5 or 6. So pick labor, material, and operations, pick your sales metric or 2, and then pick your 2 financial metrics. And then over time, you wanna monitor, manage, and control them. The whole aspect is looking for pattern recognition. It's all about patterns. Follow the patterns. You know what pattern you need to be on, and if you all of a sudden move off that pattern, then take action. That's where you control, your outcome. And obviously, with those KPIs, you're also looking into the future for the targets you wanna hit, your goals. So it all comes together, it all links together. So if you're on top of your KPIs and they're aimed at a goal, if you're moving away from it, take action, move back into the line. It's like, guardrails in your lane, basically. So, those are the kinda like the concepts to work with.
The beauty of that is the number only fits in the box. The story won't fit in the box. Like, what's the number? And it reminds me of the story of the manager meeting with the sales person, and week over week they're meeting, and continuously there were stories coming in, and the manager finally said, "Hey, listen, I just need the number. If you tell me what the number is of how many calls you made this week, I'll know what the story is." Right? There can only be a number fitting in this box and no stories, right? And so I love that. And so the guardrails is a really good analogy, good example there. So you went in, you had your own business, right? You launched that off, and then where did it go from there to now you're, I mean, the chair of these groups, like we're talking about high net worth individuals, very exclusive groups. How are you able to, I mean, your business background's phenomenal and super sharp and just super likable guys. So like these are like the table stakes, but to be able to get to that level where you have these, badass business people, and I'm saying this in a good way, right? They're really strong and they're powerhouses, right? But you're the leader, within the Naples, Florida area, and Fort Myers as well. So what did you do to get there? And what are some of the things that you believe are traits to be able to lead strong leaders?
Right. Well, let me start with Vistage, because I think Vistage is probably the closest, organization relative to your listenership. And so Vistage is focused on what I'll call small, medium enterprises. And here's where we work with business owners and CEOs, and they're all there to basically make better decisions, to basically improve their company's performance and valuation for an ultimate exit. Uh, with the type of background I've had, as I've just been describing, um, that level of thinking and guidance, if you will, to these business owners is invaluable for them, because typically you'll find in a small business owner, they're deeply engaged in working in the business. Seldom do they get the opportunity to lift up and work on the business. And so I focus them on the business. And we look out at, more, what I'll call strategic, but yet still operational type aspects of their business. So, for example, just take a simple example. If they're running out of manufacturing space, what are you going to do? Well, we talk about what to do. And, of course, we all educate each other on their KPIs and help them manage through, but lift them up out of the day-to-day grind of the business and step back and focus, take a higher level look at what's going on. And the whole, program is designed to help them improve their business by making better decisions, and ultimately, growing their companies to the level where they either pass it on to, the next generation, or they actually, do a sale or an exit strategy of some sort. And that's what the Vistage program is all about. And it's very exciting for me because through my career, I've seen literally dozens of companies, dozens of business models. And so I can basically assimilate my thinking around their business very quickly. And, having my discipline of, again, looking at their business drivers, help them see things that they may not see. I mean, I can look at a P&L and start asking all kinds of questions of why this and why that, and how come this ratio is out of whack with that ratio. And all of a sudden, we step back and say, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
we can do something about that. And so this is, for me, it's so exciting and I love it. And hopefully I'm giving a lot of value to my members. So that's the Vistage side of it. Um, Now, when you have that liquidity event, presumably if it's large enough, then you may enter the ranks of the ultra high net worth individuals,
Mm.
and that's Tiger 21. And everyone in Tiger 21 at some point in time has operated a company that they either started or they were hired in to run, but they're excellent at operations and running their businesses and making them enormously successful. In fact, 2 of my Tiger 21 members here in Naples are former Vistage members. So you can see the discipline that goes into it. But at being excellent at running a company doesn't necessarily make you excellent in managing your wealth now that you have it. So now that you have your wealth, it becomes a new skill you have to learn. Surely you have all your advisors, your financial advisors, your estate planners, and so on and so forth. But who do you have to turn to talk to about wealth-related issues? It could be your family, your children, whatever relationships you might have. It might be former partners. And so this gives ultra high net worth people an opportunity to be in a safe space to talk about the issues of continuing wealth creation, wealth preservation, and the transfer of wealth to the next
Mm.
generation. Setting up philanthropic, foundations, all those types of activities that a businessman may not be yet familiar with. And so this gives them an opportunity to continue to learn things that they didn't know as running a business. And so you'll be surprised. Every successful business owner is a consistent learner. He's a
Yeah.
lifelong learner. And so this is another opportunity for them to learn new things.
So well said. You explained both groups extremely well, Rick, and I could see how one it feeds into the other and that both are critically important. Who you hang around with is, that's one of the biggest indicators of success. You start to hang around with other high successful people, all of a sudden you start bumping elbows with them and picking up tips and you ended up doing the things that they're doing that successful people do. And it's the same happens and you start hanging around people that are negative and you start to drift towards maybe the guys are going out and they're having 6 beers every night, right? That's not a group that you really want to be hanging out with because over time that's going to compound and you're going to drift away from success. So, Rick, maybe you could talk a little bit about like the, that idea of who you hang around with. I know it's talked about a lot, but have you seen examples of guys that have come in, they just didn't have somebody to talk to? Because it is lonely at the top. Like when you're making these, you have, hundreds of people that you're reporting to, or maybe it's just you on your own, or maybe you have a handful of people that are reporting to you. You have a lot of weight on your shoulders. And it's like, who do you talk to other than maybe your spouse of these things? So can you maybe talk a little bit about, the importance of who you hang around with? And are there examples of somebody came in at this level and then you saw them grow immensely to be able to get to the other side?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's fascinating. Business owners, really have few people that they talk to or can talk to because you're right, it's lonely at the top, and maybe their issue is their number 2 guy. Well, who are they gonna talk to about that? Their spouse may or may not be intimately familiar with the business, may not have a background in, let's say, personnel management or organizational theory or change management issues. And so an organization like Vistage, for example, where you come together and do peer-to-peer problem solving, which is really one of the biggest strengths of Vistage, is bringing all your members into a room for a day where you basically problem solve. What's interesting is that no two members can be of the same industry in that room because of the confidentiality nature of what is discussed. But the strength of that, the power of that, is the fact that people solve those problems through their lenses, which is not your lens. And so you get these aha moments because they see it through that angle that you would not otherwise find it. And staring at yourself in the mirror and talking to yourself in the mirror isn't gonna solve it either. So, the strength of who you hang around with in an organization like that is extraordinarily powerful, and you reach those aha moments. I'll tell you one example. I brought a woman who, was running a manufacturing firm in, Fort Myers, and relatively small company, and it was a company that made, cosmetics, for skincare. And, she was a PhD in biology, understood all the dynamics around, formulating, compounds for making cosmetics. But she was not a businesswoman and didn't really understand the intricacies of manufacturing. And, when she came in, she was extremely small company, and 5 years later, she had more than quadrupled the size of her firm, and was well on her way to becoming extraordinarily successful. And, we went through many different problem-solving scenarios with her, and she was a brilliant learner, and she applied what she heard, and it was just a phenomenal success story. It was just great. But that's what happens when you know, hang around, as you said,
Right.
with successful people, and you get great advice. And it's not like you're hiring professionals to come in and fix everything for you. You're learning how to do it
Mm,
yourself, and it's much more, I think, gratifying when
yeah.
you can take back those learnings, apply it to your business, and then look at the results. It's just really fascinating. It's a lot of fun to watch, for me anyway,
Yeah.
uh, as I guide these business owners through their journey, if you will.
Well, it makes a lot of sense that you get advice from somebody that doesn't have any sort of direct incentive to, whatever which way you go. Do you go this way or that way? Like you just want the best. And so when you have these other members that are top of what they're doing, they're just going to tell you straight. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen as my career has, improve, we'll just say has grown, is the fact that truth becomes very important. And as you start to grow as a leader, you have more people reporting to you. Sometimes, like, people can be afraid to tell you the truth. And so, as the leader, your goal really should be to make it safe. This is a safe place to share truth. But in a group like what you're talking about, Vistage and Tiger 21, it's like, I'm going to tell you straight because I don't need to sugarcoat this because, we're both equals, right? And that's most of the time, that's what you got to hear that. You want to hear the truth.
That's right, and that's why they're there.
Right.
They're there to learn, they're there to get good advice, and believe me, without that element of desire
Yeah.
to improve, they wouldn't be there, and
Yeah.
but they're there because they recognize the need. It's an amazing, we talk about sometimes mentorship, do you have mentors?
Yeah.
There's a difference between having a mentor, and having, a coach or, like in Vistage. And I'd say the mentor is probably more empathetic with you as a person,
Yeah.
wanting to see you do well, but not necessarily challenge you hard,
Uh, right.
or holding you accountable to do what you said you were gonna do.
Yeah.
And in Vistage, when you're in front of the group problem solving your problem, uh, one of the last questions I ask of the individual is, "Okay, now you've heard all these suggestions, all these recommendations. What are you going to do next?" And they tell
Yeah.
us, and we record it.
Yeah.
The
Good.
next meeting, they come back, and we all say, "Okay, what did you do?"
In front of the group,
In front of the
right?
group.
So what do you have, like 30 days or something before you're going to be reporting? And so you got 30 days. The clock is starting because you're going to need to go in front of all these super successful people and say, I took your advice and I implemented, or I just didn't get around to doing it. And I could imagine that would probably be a major insult. You spend all that time and then the
Right,
person just didn't execute. So I could
right.
see how that would be huge
Yeah,
accountability.
so the accountability is great and holds
Yeah.
people responsible. not to say that mentorship is bad. It's very good, but it's different.
Yeah.
It's just different, and you have a different outcome with a mentor. And mentors are good. And in fact, one of my regrets going through my careers, I wish I had had more consistent mentors just to bounce things off of. But so I don't want to downplay mentorship at all. Uh, but but you step up a level when you're in front of other executives and business owners, and they're holding you accountable to do what you said you were going to do. No one else will hold you accountable, because you're the boss. But your peers will hold you accountable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I love how you explained it. So good. Rick, is there any like low hanging fruit where you see these business owners come in? Okay, so they come into the group, and then they're there for like a year or two or whatever, and they've implemented something where you see the most amount of change. So are there any like low hanging fruit that you can share with our listeners that, when people come into the group, this is like the low hanging fruit that they do where they see like instant results that they implement right away that maybe they weren't doing before?
Right. Uh, and it's different for everybody. There's no one common number. However, there are common denominators in every company that's in existence, and that one big common denominator is people. So your organization, your employees, is the common denominator across all companies. And so many people come into Vistage with some element of concern, issue, or opportunity associated with their employees. But others come in with financial related issues. Some come in with operationally oriented issues. But it's different for everyone. But like we say in Vistage, don't come to one meeting and expect an immediate ROI. It's not going to happen. I mean, it may happen, but it's not going to happen. But I'll give you a quick little story on how things can happen very dramatically. So several years ago, I got this idea. It was pre-COVID. I got this idea that if I asked every member to simply go back into their organizations and ask their managers to simply reduce their budget by 5%. Buying 5% and just take it out of your budget, give it back. And it's not a lot of money. It really isn't. 5%. That 5% will go right to the bottom line, right to the bottom line. So one of my members went to his management, and he happens to be a major importer from China. And so one of his managers had this computer program that he had acquired, and they knew the container size of the shipping containers. They knew the size of the boxes that their product was in, but they never gave the manufacturer in China any guidance on how to stack that container. So he got this computer program that worked out an algorithm to optimize and maximize the number of product they could get in that container. And they shipped that off to the manufacturer and did it. And it actually turned out to be a $250,000 recurring savings by optimizing the way they stacked that container. It was a little simple thing like that. And it was all driven off of my one little question: find me 5% out of your budget. And so things like that is just phenomenal. What you can get when you just, because nobody was thinking about it. I just happened to come up with it one day and said, I think I'll ask the team just to do it, see what happens.
And I
Well, it's one of those interesting little exercises we do.
Very smart. And that's what, a great leader encourages others and helps people live up to their potential. And asking good questions is a it's a sign of a great leader. So that was great. But I love how you positioned it to them. Give it back. Give it
Yeah.
back to the company. So it's like, the 5%, cut your budget, like give it back. And so it's something that you didn't say what to do. You said, here's the result. So it was like an outcome you were looking for, and then the team members ended up finding it. And that's a great example there of some low hanging fruit. And I think, to be quite fair, in most businesses, you can find 5%. You can probably find 10%, right? If you say, listen, I have a challenge for you, and you throw it out more as a challenge versus do this now. It's like, hey guys, I have a challenge for you. Let's see if you can come up with X, right? If you come up with Y, there'll be a dinner in there for you or whatever, and you make a little bit of a challenge out of it, right?
Yeah, exactly, and as I said to my members, I said, and incent your managers to find the 5%. Give 1% of the 5% back to your manager as a
Oh,
bonus
great.
if he does it.
Oh, yeah. They'll
Yeah.
find it really quick. You get 1%, you get 20% of everything you save. Yeah, you just watch to see how fast they move,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
it's amazing, and like I said, it falls right to the bottom line, so
yeah. No,
everybody wins. Everybody wins.
well, and this is I'll just build on that because when you say right to the bottom line, if you're just say you're running at a 10% profit margin, if you save, let's just say you save $100,000 and you're running at a 10% profit margin, that means that in order to make that $100,000, you would need to make $1 million in revenue to actually net 100,000. So for every dollar, if you're running at 10%, it's an actual, it's like a 10x you'd have to replace the revenue with, which was when I caught my mind got around that concept, Rick. I was like more hardcore on expenses. It's like if you cut here, if we don't cut here, this means that we need to do 10x or 5x uh, to be able to in revenue. And it was a lot easier to cut on the bottom line than trying to do something that was 5 to 10 times greater.
Yeah, well, look, think about it this way. It's much easier to lower the water level under the bridge than to raise the bridge,
Mm. Oh,
right?
that's good. Oh, that's
Right?
really good. Yeah, I like that.
So if the water's coming up and hitting the bridge, the top of the bridge, you can easily lower the water as opposed to reconstruct and rebuild the bridge on there.
No, I like that. I got a new nugget there for my pocket for analogies. All right, Rick. So you're really ingrained with speaking with multiple different business owners on a day to day and helping them level up their business, and then you're also part of a group where it's really about taking the wealth, not only preserving it, but growing it as well. So there's so many things that entrepreneurs can invest in today. And as you know, we have a real estate investment firm, and we have to say no to 200 different apartment opportunities to find one golden nugget. But because we do, we're able to deliver a phenomenal result for investors. Now, the reason I'm saying that is to help our listeners out there, how do you decide or how do you see like a consistent theme with your members? How do they decide in yourself to be able to invest in something or not? Are there any sort of like filters or decision making, we'll say filters there for them to be able to make good investment decisions?
So Tiger does not give investment advice, at all. What we do is, we expose our members to investable opportunities, but they have to do their own due diligence and their own, decision making in that regard. What we do mostly with our Tiger members, is educate them on, let's say, the global environment of investing. So we'll bring in experts on geopolitical issues that might affect your relative investment asset classes. We'll expose you to new alternatives as an asset class, for example. But in terms of investing advice, no, we will not do that because there's too much liability associated
Sure,
with it,
that makes a
and
lot of
that's not our job. That's really
Yeah,
not our.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
What would you
our
say? Yeah, or go ahead, finish your
Our
thought.
our, our function is really to bring
Yeah.
the individuals together and again do peer-to-peer problem solving. So, a member may come in with the fact that, I'm in this one particular investment and or I'm about to go, better yet, I'm about to make this investment. Can anybody give me some advice associated with that investment? Do you know the people on the other end? Yes or no? I mean, have you have experience with this particular vehicle before? Yes or no? What was that experience like? So what they're doing is they're gaining their own due diligence, their own information, their own intelligence around making an investment, for example. That's an example of what we facilitate in those meetings. And that's very, very helpful because again, they're now able to talk to somebody. Now they may have their advisors, but again, advisors have their narratives and their agendas, right? So here's another opportunity to get a totally different perspective, several different perspectives on an investment vehicle. So that's the beauty of what Tiger provides, is that environment where you can just basically, well, I'll call it kick around the idea before you actually step in and make those investments. That's one example.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like unbiased advice is extremely helpful. So if you have some advice from people that, and the other thing is like these guys are all super successful as well, right? When I say guys, I'm saying guys and gals, right? So, but the point there is that they're all extremely successful. So, and they're unbiased, right? So whether you go one way or another, they're going to tell you the truth. So I think that's really important as well. Unbiased wise counsel from somebody that doesn't have a stake in one way or another, and that they are successful as well. Because Rick, you know how it is. You go to Uncle Joe, and Uncle Joe's his mission is going to be to find out everything that's wrong with it. We've seen that through the years. It's like the perfect house. And it's just like it's phenomenal. It's like you see it, and the buyers know it, but then Uncle Joe comes along and he's like, "Well, did you see that? Or there's a hairline crack in the foundation, or something that is not structural, but it's like it kills it." And so you be mindful on who you're asking counsel from. That would be my only caveat to that.
Yeah, yeah, and again, everybody in the group, like you said, they're enormously successful, and so their credentials, if you will, are taken, you know, on their word because of their success. So it's not like you're dealing with an unsophisticated investor. They're very sophisticated investors, and they've all had their knocks, they've all had their losses and their gains, and so they learn from those, and that's the advice and guidance they give when presented with a question or an opportunity.
Rick, what would you say would be the biggest challenge that like you're seeing investors face in today's market? If you were to kind of, say that, okay, this is probably top of mind out of everything right now with investors, what are you seeing out there?
What I'm saying is, what is the next 3 to 4 years gonna look like? I mean, um, I don't know about you, Mark, but as an investor myself, I look at the runway. How much runway do I have? Now, part of Vistage, are aligned with a company called ITR Economics, and they are economic forecasters, and they've been talking to Vistage for 20 years. And for the last decade or so, they've been predicting or forecasting that we're going to have a significant economic downturn in 2030. The reason being is demographics. We're losing our productive um, population. Population, and the baby boomers are moving on into advanced age, and they're not as productive as they were in the past. So, are we going to be able to backfill that with technology? Are we gonna be able to backfill that with people? Well, immigration is one answer. We've seen the bad side, I think, of immigration here lately, but there's also a good side of immigration. But the fact of the matter is that around the world, if you look at the world productivity, uh, um, uh, the world population is leveling off, if not decreasing. China, it's happening there. It's happening in Germany in particular, a little bit in Britain, and of course here in the US. So with the lack of productivity ability, the economy is gonna basically, we think, turn, towards a depression in 2030. At least that's the forecast.
Hmm.
So from an investment perspective, what do you invest in?
Yeah.
Business perspective, when do I sell? When do I begin to build my powder so I can buy a company that wasn't as planning for this downturn as I've been planning for the downturn? I can pick up a great asset. So for me, it's looking out over the next 3 to 5 years and trying to pick a course of action that I believe will maximize, that eventual, event if it happens, or some hybrid of it.
Right.
Something's gonna happen.
Right.
The forecast is that it's not gonna be a short-lived thing. It could go 5 years. It's gonna be deep, and it's gonna be long. So you have to prepare now for that. And so, the guidance we're giving our members, both in, Tiger as well as in Vistage, is to start looking at that 3 to 5 year horizon and plan your actions accordingly, as best you can interpret it. And there's not one right answer for everybody, but everybody has to kind of like get on the map. And I think the advantage that Vistage members are going to have, as well as Tiger members, over the rest of the population, is that we're focused on it and we're thinking about it and we're looking at it, and we're not just blindly muddling along. And so I think that's a very positive aspect of what these two organizations have to offer their members.
Yeah, that's really great. And from a timing standpoint, that's where you got to really look at. The question probably comes to a lot of listeners' mind is, is it real estate? Is it stocks? Is it cash? Is it precious metals? Is it Bitcoin? Like, and if somebody says that to you, what's your, I guess your standard response is, or your real response here is, it depends, or how would you answer them?
Well, again, everybody's going to be different. I mean, some people, might have the resources to take greater risk than others. And so you have to understand your risk profile. It's not just, your asset base so much as your appetite for risk. Those that have a very high risk profile, they'll take greater risk with, let's say, Bitcoin, uh, or not. Those types of assets have to be examined. I think everything has to be examined relative to risk profile. Our business owners in Vistage, for example, some of them are coming up on the potential to have a liquidity event. Well, now timing becomes very critical, very, very critical. The general advice now is before 2028, to have that event, because after 28, it might get difficult to do it because your valuation might start slipping because of external circumstances that you might not be able to control.
Yeah, no, for sure. And this is where, like, if you invest in real estate, for example, is you want to make sure you get, longer term fixed debt. You want to make sure that it cash flows. And if you're having to float huge amount of cash into it through that period coming up, it's like that's maybe not something that you really should do. So, like for us now, we're only buying cash flowing properties where we know we can go in and add value and basically force appreciation up, and we fix our debt long term. These are some of the things that you want to make sure to do, rather than just buying it and then hoping it's going to go up and having to feed it along the way. That's maybe not an approach that you should be taking today. Uh,
Exactly. Well, what you're doing there is you're mitigating your long-term risk.
that's right.
Yeah.
So Rick, I know we're coming up on time here. I have three quick questions here, so it's like rapid fire, and then
Sure.
we're going to wrap this up. So you ready for it? You ready for rapid fire?
Go ahead.
First question: favorite book that's made the biggest impact in your life?
Good to Great, Jim Collins. And well, actually, there's a second one. It's called Revolutionary Wealth by Alvin Toffler. I read it a long time ago, and I just know that it helped me think through, how wealth can be created and lost. So it's a good book for those who are on that journey, if you will. It's an old book. It's an old book. It was back in early 2000s, but I think it's still a great read.
Yeah, I'll have to pick that up. I haven't read that one. Okay, second question: how would others describe you in three words?
I'm definitely a connector.
Yes, you are.
I'm analytical, and I'm very inquisitive. I ask a lot of questions.
Yeah,
I wanna know things.
yeah. It's such a consistent theme, curiosity amongst top
Ye
producers. And final question for you: what final advice, parting device, or advice would you give a young entrepreneur that's maybe starting off?
I would say, seek early and seek often advice. And that can be through mentorship, individual coaches, or, joining an organization like Vistage. It will just add so much incredible value, and it's one of the things that I wish I had known about in my career. I think I would have been probably, a couple magnitudes more successful if I had focused on that myself at the time. I got through okay, but, I know I could have done a lot better if I'd had that advice.
Such wisdom here shared today, Rick. I really appreciate it. So for the listeners, say they want to join Vistage, maybe they're in Southwest Florida, or maybe even Tiger 21, they want to learn more about it. What's the best way they can find out more about your organizations?
Well, they can go to my LinkedIn page, obviously, number one. But I think the best way to get a hold of me is through my Vistage email, which is R Schwartz, RSCHWARTZ, at vistageflorida.com. That's probably the best way to get me.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. You
All
are
right.
a legend when it comes to building businesses and overall wealth and wisdom. So really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Mark. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, right on. So thanks for listening, everyone. If you like the show, please share and subscribe to the channel where we are building a community of up and coming entrepreneurs. And remember, the fastest way to build wealth is to grow your business and invest in real estate. I love you guys.